Amie's with us. Amie Parnes, Hill senior political correspondent, author of Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. Amie, how are you?
Hi, Glenn. Good. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, can we play just that little collage of all the people that said this wasn't happening? Do we have that? Can we play that real quick?
Joe Biden has vision, he has knowledge, he has a strategic thinker. This is a very sharp president. In terms of his public presentation, if he makes a slip of the tongue here or there, what's the deal?
You're asking me my personal opinion. He is sharp. He is on top of things. When we have meetings with him, with his staff, he's constantly pushing us, trying to get more information.
I can tell you, this was the day before that interview. I can tell you he was sharper than anyone I've spoken to about a very
This was happening all the time, Amie. Everyone was saying how sharp he is. That was, according to your book, just absolutely not true, and everybody in the White House knew that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was. It's something that we really dug into in reporting out this book, and we had questions about what interactions certain people had with the president. We detail how Eric Swalwell, a congressman from California, for example, attended a congressional picnic with the president a year before the debate debacle, a disaster. And he had to almost remind then President Biden who he was. And this was someone who he competed against in the 2020 presidential election. He should know who he is. And there's detail after detail about that in this book.
In your book, you talk about how there were bets being made, how they were looking, shopping for judges on who was going to swear her in. They thought he was going to die before the election. I mean, did you get the sense from anyone while you're researching this book that anyone thought maybe this isn't really good for the Constitution?
I mean, that's why right now you're seeing a lot of arrows thrown in the direction, of the former president and his aides. People are really, really upset about. They think it's a cover up. They think that they should have been more candid, even within their own party, about the president's cognitive abilities. Glenn, I covered the president for a long time, and I tried to get after the story, and the White House was constantly, I know my colleagues were as well. It's not like any of us were asleep at the switch, but the White House would batter us when we asked questions about his mental acuity and his age. It was a constant battle.
But was there anybody that knew that should have spoken out? I mean, in the press or anything? I mean, it's one thing to speculate. It's one thing to, I hear rumors. And if you're shut off from it, but in the White House, it seems like there were quite a few people that knew this is a disaster.
Yeah.
Who's running the country at that point? Who was the president?
This close set of advisors kept him really close, and that's why I think you didn't see him as much. Right now, President Trump is out there talking to reporters every day.
Yeah.
I think the press corps wanted to see Biden do some similar things and take a similar media approach, and he did not. And we detail in the book, there's a fundraiser where someone, says that he looks like he's going to die at the fundraiser. Right. There are other moments where, we take you inside Phil Murphy's house, and we detail how he's speaking to just a couple dozen fundraisers at a small house, and he needs fluorescent tape on the floor to guide him from place to place. He needs a teleprompter. These aren't common things for a small event.
At a house?
Yes. And makeup, this was another revelation in our book. Whenever he traveled overseas, he was met with a makeup artist. That was his first order of business. Sometimes he missed meetings because the makeup artist was there to touch him up. They were clearly concerned about the optics around his age and around his mental acuity.
You write at one point that the makeup artist, he goes in, he sits down for the makeup, and then he calls it a day. And that was it.
Yeah. And, these are aides that were talking to us about this. Obviously, they knew about it. And they said at times he looked really frazzled. He would get out of the limousine and, would look around and wouldn't know where he was. And so, yeah, it's very startling even to the people who were telling us these stories.
But, it's one thing to be, it's one thing to go, yeah, that was really weird. And because it's another to realize that is the man that has to make the decision, for the country. God forbid we're attacked or whatever. And he's not there. Was there anyone inside fighting and saying, we have got to alert the American people? We have to invoke the 25th Amendment. It's 25th, isn't it, Sue?
Yes.
Yeah. We've got to invoke the 25th Amendment. This isn't right. The people have put their power in this man. He is no longer capable of making these decisions. I think a lot of people would have had respect for that. Instead, I walk away going, was there no one that cared about the Constitution and cared about what could have happened with this guy in charge?
No, and I think that's why you're seeing so much fire aimed at his close set of advisors right now, because they could have been more candid. And, Democrats in general, I think, were confused as to his cognitive abilities. I think the reason he wanted to do this debate and his advisors wanted to do this debate earlier, this disastrous one in June last year, is because they knew that he was losing in the polls. Obviously, they wanted to change the trajectory of this race. And they thought that was a moment that could help him. Instead, it brought out, it showed on display everything for the American public.
So I honestly thought for the longest time that they did that knowing somebody was like, no, let's put him on the stage and let's do it now before, things get completely out of hand and he's going to be running for re-election. I really thought they put him on stage that early because I'd never seen that happen before in American politics. Put him on stage that early so he would be exposed and everybody would be like, okay, we can't run him.
And what's fascinating, Glenn, is that we take you inside. I mean, we open the book inside Nancy Pelosi's living room, and she's watching the debate alone. She had warned President Biden at the time. She said, oh, you don't want to debate Trump. And she, mentioned it under the guise of, oh, why would you belittle yourself and appear on stage with him? But she knows. And Jim Clyburn, who's also watching the debate alone in his living room, and we take you inside there, he's having a drink and watching it. They're all alone. They're not at some debate watch party together because they almost know what is about to happen. They're watching the train wreck unfold bit by bit and alone.
So what do we do to ensure this? Well, let me ask you, before I ask you that again, who was running the country?
That's a very good question. I think, his close set of advisors had a great big role in that. You see Ron Klain these days sort of trying to distance himself. He was the former chief of staff, trying to distance himself from the optics of what was happening.
But it's not. But it's really not optics. It is the truth. Somebody was making decisions because the president could. I was always fascinated in history by Woodrow Wilson. Edith Wilson ran the White House for a while, but it was his own party that came in because it was the same thing. People like rumors, and they're like, I don't think he's really there. And he wasn't seen for a long time. And so the leadership of the party came, finally forced the first lady and said, because she was saying he's going to run for a third term. And they said, no, or we'll expose all of this right now. He's not running for another term. But it seems to be the same thing. I'm wondering how many presidents have we had that, nobody seems to really care that the elected official isn't actually doing what that official is supposed to do. They're just some unelected people just making the decisions.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, Glenn, you see the former president has all but disappeared from public view since leaving office, and I think that also speaks volumes about his state of mind.
Was Kamala that in the know? Which, if God forbid something would have happened, who would have grabbed the football? Who would have been the one?
It would have been Kamala Harris, and that's sort of why, I mean, you teased this earlier, but her communications director would carry around this spreadsheet of Republican judges because he felt almost that like she had to be validated in that moment, and only a Republican judge could really swear her in and have that validation from Republicans. He thought that there was no way that such a divisive country, and people would support her. And so we detail how he came into that role with the spreadsheet. He traveled with it. The DNC had plans in case something happened to the president. And we expose all of this for the first time in this book.
Can you find any? Because I'm a self-taught, historian, but I'm pretty good at it. I've never seen anything like this in American history. Have you?
It's pretty remarkable. It's really unprecedented. And it was really interesting to report out. I think people have questions about the media and how we went about reporting this. And it's almost like the president needed to leave office for people to actually admit what was happening and tell us some stories. That's what's interesting. I think, when you cover a president, they're always worried that the White House is going to come down hard on them. And so they're less prone to want to tell you things. And then when they leave office, this is when the floodgates open up.
Is anybody going to be held accountable for this?
I mean, I think right now the party, that's why you're seeing the Democratic Party scrambling. I think, first of all, they need to come out and admit what had happened here and almost look themselves in the mirror and talk about Joe Biden. The other day, Jake Tapper asked Tim Walz about it, and Tim Walz kind of just dances around the question. I think they need to be very frank about what was happening and what they were witnessing, and they don't want to do that right now.
It's interesting to me. I just told this story on the air because people are kicking around Donald Trump wants to run for a third term. No, that's against the Constitution, and that was put there for a very clear reason. And it wasn't put in there by the Republicans. It was put in by the Democrats, FDR's own party, when they saw what had happened to the presidency. It just gained far too much power. And it's not good for anybody when that happens.
No.
And, here you have, as soon as FDR died, that's when all of the Democrats were like, okay, we got to make sure that doesn't happen again. But they were for him when he was alive.
Right.
It seems to be kind of the same thing here, that everybody was like, okay, it's cool. But is anybody going to step up now and say this cannot happen ever again?
I think that's what has to happen, Glenn. Someone has to take responsibility for it. And no one is. And I'm curious to see how the Democrats reckon with this.
Amie, thank you very much. I'm glad somebody finally told the story and got the story. It is, if we don't fix this, it's just going to happen again, and it'll happen with the other party. I mean, it will. I mean, you give people in power an inch, they are going to take a mile, and this cannot happen. This just cannot happen again. Amie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Glenn.
You bet. Amie Parnes, fight inside the wildest battle for the White House.